Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Patty from ultraslowrunner.com. For today's video, I thought I would share with you my 5 tips for selecting either your first race or your next race. Now, everybody has their own 5 tips, I would imagine. So you may hear some other ideas from other people. Maybe even you have ideas for what you did for your first race. If so, definitely put them in the comments below so we can share them with everyone and just kind of get a good idea of what tips would really be helpful for those of us that are selecting our first race. My first tip, however, is a fairly obvious one. You do need to decide on what distance you want to do. Now, oftentimes people ask me if they need to start with a shorter race and build up to whatever their goal race is. For example, if your goal, and it's on your bucket list, is to run a marathon, then no, I don't think you need to necessarily do shorter races in the build-up to that marathon. Mostly because in your training, you're going to be running those shorter distances in your training miles, in your weekly miles. So yes, you're going to be moving far past the 5K distance. And probably most people end up running anywhere from 20 to 22 miles for their long run for a marathon. So I don't think you need to, especially if you're struggling with finances, then no, I would skip doing shorter races. However, there are some benefits to doing shorter races in the build-up. One of them, of course, is practicing your race day sort of strategy and getting to know what a race day is like, the types of things that go on in the morning of the race, right before the start line. Oftentimes there's going to be a packet pickup in the morning or oftentimes the night before. And there's just a lot of things to kind of learn about and prepare for in a race, in what happens on a race day. So in that case, I think might be a good idea to do some shorter races just to get used to that. But again, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Another good thing, however, in running shorter races is oftentimes it's a very good motivator for a person to continue training for a race, or let's say their marathon, because oftentimes your training plan could last from 3 months to even a year. So oftentimes it's hard to stay motivated that whole time. But if you have some shorter races planned, that can really help with staying motivated and staying encouraged to continue your training. So in that case, yes, if that's going to help you, then definitely sign up for some shorter races. Tip number 2 sort of goes along with tip number 1, but you want to decide what type of course you want to run. There's a wide variety of different types of courses, and you just kind of have to give it some thought in what you think is going to be the best race for you and the best course, which is going to help you be successful in your race. So whether you want that to be on a trail or a road or lots of hills or a flat course, that is all going to be up to you. Oftentimes people ask, do I need to do a very flat, easy race for my first race? Now, that's what I did, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary either, and here's the reason why. Let's say somebody lives in Colorado. They live at high altitude already. So for them to do a high altitude race might not be that big of a deal, or a hill with a lot of climbing in it might not be a big deal because that might be where they run on a daily basis. So in that case, choosing a course, maybe they want to change and run a flat course. I don't know. Maybe they're going for a certain time. Whatever the case may be, I think you just need to choose what you think is going to be the best race for you, where you're going to feel successful, a course that you're going to enjoy as well. So if that's road, great. If it's trail, go for it. Whatever is going to work for you. You also have to consider, do you have the time to train for that course? So for me, when I pick a race, I do have to take into consideration, first of all, where my fitness is on the day I register for the race, and then where my fitness can be on race day. So I do need to take a couple things into consideration when planning for a race. Do I have enough time to train for this race? And if not, do I need to pick a different race? So just another thing to keep in mind. My third tip applies to some people, maybe not so much for others, but is really the consideration of finances when thinking about a race that you want to do. Now, almost always in my running career, if you want to call it a career, there's always been a registration fee. Now, if you're running a 5K, obviously it's going to be less expensive than a marathon or an ultra marathon. Prices can vary. If you're in a small town, small race type of situation, it might be less expensive. Again, a lot of that depends on the whole permitting process and the racing company and things like that. But find a race that fits your budget and decide just how much you want to spend on that race. It's not just the entry fee, though, that you need to consider. If you need to travel, there's going to be travel costs. Depending on the race that you pick, you may need some extra gear in terms of clothing or shoes, or maybe you're going to need a running pack and a bladder and things like that. So that's another cost to consider when selecting a race. So overall, just consider those things. How much is it going to cost? How much am I willing to spend? What can I afford to spend on this race? So I think that's a good tip number 3. Tip number 4 is deciding what you want out of a race. Now, this may seem funny, but a lot of people like to get, what shall we call them? Goodie bags and swag and medals and t-shirts and a pasta feed and food afterwards. Nowadays it's beer and pizza after races and things like that. So that may be something to consider when selecting a race. What exactly do you want to get out of this race? I will say that most ultras, at least the ones that I've done, are mostly kind of small races. There's not a lot in your swag bag if you get one at all. So that's something that's not terribly important to me. I don't need a medal or a t-shirt or anything like that. For me, I just want the course to be marked well. That's always my concern when running an ultra marathon. So again, it's personal preference, whatever you think you want out of that race. I will say when you first start running, it's pretty cool to get a medal at the end. And it's kind of cool to display your medals when you run multiple races and things like that. Those are fun because you get to really look back on your experience and celebrate what you've accomplished. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And if that's what drives you to run a certain race and stay healthy and keep motivated, choose a race that's got the swag that you want. So that was tip number 4. Now on to tip number 5, which I think is very important, is how much planning do you really want to do for a race? So for me, I don't really like the planning process. I don't like a lot of complex details going into a race. That's all stuff for my husband to work out, not for me. Mostly because I don't like to add extra stress to my training or my racing experience. Sometimes you can get away with that, and other times, depending on the race that you select, you're just going to have to deal with more complications than another race. So just think about how much planning you really want to put into it. Obviously, a 5K is probably not going to be taking as much planning as a marathon, and definitely not as much planning as an ultra marathon. So just consider that. Think about how much time and stress you want to invest in a certain race. Now, I would always suggest that you select your first race as one that's not nearly as complicated. Maybe one that doesn't require any travel, maybe one that doesn't have a lot of logistical things to it. Getting to the start line should be fairly easy. Maybe you don't need to worry about crew or drop bags and getting back to the finish line if you drop from the race. All those sorts of things. If you don't want to deal with that, and hopefully, I mean, after a while you get some experience in that. But anyway, that may be another thing to consider when choosing a race. Now, I could make a whole nother video on this very topic, and I just might do that. So if you would like another video discussing tips to entering your first race, I would be more than happy to share another video. There's just so much to cover, especially if you're a first-time racer and you're just getting into running and things like that. There's a lot to cover. It's not always an easy process to get through. So if you have any suggestions or comments, just leave them down below and I will read them and see what I can do about some future videos. Ultimately, when selecting a race, I think one of the most important parts, especially in the training, is to really believe in yourself. When I started running, you know, I had all sorts of doubts in going into a new race, especially if it was sort of jumping up to another distance. You know, I think going from a 5K to a 10K is a really big deal. So really take some time to trust yourself, believe in yourself that you can actually do it. I think that's really important to consider. All the other stuff ends up working out in the end, but the mental part of racing is it can be the thing that gets you to the finish line more than the clothing you're wearing or things like that. So ultimately, believe in yourself, know that you can do it, trust your training, and erase all of those doubts that you may be having. So, gosh, if I could give you any running advice, that would be it, because I've learned from that. I've definitely made a lot of mistakes in the process, and over time I've sort of grown to know that if you put in the work and challenge yourself, you're probably going to finish whatever it is you want to do. So that's it for my tips for this video. Hope you're all having some great training right now. I know right now it's kind of the kickoff to a lot of races. Boy, have I signed up for a lot of races this year. I have quite the racing calendar, and I'm really excited and looking forward to everything that's going to happen this year. So be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos related to running or life or puppies or whatever it may be. Subscribe, like this video if you want more content like this, and comment, especially if you have suggestions on what videos you would like to see from me. So everyone, get out there, put in your miles, whether you're a walker or a runner or a cyclist or dancer, stroller, I don't know, whatever you like to do, whatever you enjoy. So anyway, I'm going to say goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.